Hello everyone, welcome to Insights ICANN initiative. Today we'll start our episode with a small story of Purnima and Marappa. So basically, it is titled A Call for All to Share in the Freedom. So, as you know, we have been referring the newspaper Deccan Herald for quite some time to pick some good editorials and discussion topics for us. Deccan Herald has brought in a series or a kind of initiative called DH Change Makers. So, you can see the logo here. So, in this, many examples, the local examples of how people have made a difference in the lives of the society by giving back. So, we know the relevance of this in essay. Today's story will be about Purnima and Marappa. So there are many such stories which are there. Let us try to cover good interesting stories and real life examples from them for our answer writing. Based on the next episode we can plan accordingly. So today there is the story of Purnima and Marappa. They were bonded laborers in brick lints. So, as we know, the issue here, they were facing a lot of physical abuse and were very much scared to escape because of the dire consequences of escaping. So, as we know, the constitutional validity tells that bonded labor is banned in India. So, still, it is existing in many brick kilns, pig farms, we can say, and many of the agricultural activities as well, tile factories. So these are the areas where bonded labor still exists. So once this Purnima and Marappa were taken or rehabilitated, they have been given released certificates telling that they are free from bonded labor. So the couple have thought that instead of celebrating, they thought of celebrating their own freedom by giving others also the same opportunity. So what they faced is once they were rehabilitated from the brick kiln where they were acting as bonded laborers, they were introduced to normal life. But for them to claim many benefits of the government, they had to have proper documents, which was something they didn't possess. They had to have identity cards, and it took a lot of time for them to understand what exactly is happening in the outside world and what is the need of the hour for them to adapt themselves to. So this is what we call struggles with rehabilitation, and for them making two ends meet or surviving itself became a big challenge. So with the help of a foundation called Udayunmukha Foundation, which is a 120 member association of bonded labor, it is supported by the Karnataka state government and non-profit organizations. So this entity has set up a lot of help facilities for such rehabilitated bonded laborers. And the woman here, Purnima, was trained in tailoring, and now she not only owns a shop, or we can say owns a boutique where the tailoring shop goes on, she also takes orders from various government departments to provide laptop sleeves, to provide various other equipments needed in the government shops. So hers and Madhapa's story are quite encouraging here. But what we need to learn here, especially for our GS paper 4 second part, that is the case study, is the modus operandi of bonded labor. That is how this bonded labor actually performs. So this is a first hand evidence told by the two victims of bonded labor. So you can use this information to plan a rehabilitation process in your district if it comes up in the case study. So the first idea is, we believe that bonded labor has been eradicated, but the truth is bonded labor exists but by taking different forms. Earlier, bonded labor would be perceived as a person being chained or they're being trapped in a system, but now the notion has changed. It is more of restrictions to one's freedom. So here, bonded restrictions on one freedom of, let's say, employment and movement. This will be restricted in modern ideas of bonded labor. So how does a person get trapped in this? Is through the means of informal credit. That is, let's say, credit or advances. When a person in a rural area is in need of money, they usually go to some rich landlords or money lenders from whom they borrow the amount. So they tell that instead of paying the money, that is the owner here, instead of paying money, they tell that you work with me for 5 years and that will be it. You need not pay money. Instead of that, you come and work with me. So this is nothing but a kind of bonded labor. So as the days goes by, physical abuse starts, restrictions start, that you cannot escape from here without my permission, you cannot go out of here. And as a result, people will not be able to work efficiently, as day and night the work is extracted from them, resulting in loss of productivity. At the end of the day, it's not real that 5 years will be the end of bonded labor. It goes on extending in the pretext that interest has not been paid. You have just paid the principal amount by working 5 years. Interest sum needs to be working for 3 more years or even in more. So it keeps on extending, putting a person under the loop of bonded labor, and they don't have an escape from this. So why this issue has come up? It has come up mainly because of lack of transparency in payments, or let's say any amount of money the person has given, or they don't maintain any kind of accounts. As we know, this is a feature of informal sources of credit. And here, when they are working, they are paid extremely low wages, having no match with the minimum standards prescribed by the government. As a result, what happens? It is also linked to human trafficking. So many of the people who were rescued recently in the state, they were from different states. That is, they would have come here in search of some economic activities, and as a result, they are forced into bonded labor. Many a times, the owners, or the clean owner in this case, they outsmart the local police. As they get information about local police coming and conducting a raid, they try to hide these credentials that they are bonded laborers, but show that they all are employed workers. So because of this, even when a person gets out of the bonded labor idea and they stay in the same village or area, they are harassed and traumatized by these owners. So, what is the other negative impact that the people faces? Incomplete rehabilitation process. So, incomplete rehabilitation in the sense, for the case of Purnima and her husband here, the person who was arrested, the person who was a culprit was arrested and sent to prison. But in many other cases, they are merely warned and left out. So most survivors continue to live close by, and they are still vulnerable to the exploitation of the owners in this case. So what is needed here? We need some action beyond rehabilitation. Okay, so this is something that is needed, not just telling that we will come bring them out, give them the free certificates and give them some amount, or let's say support to come back to the mainstream life. We need some extra action from the side of the government and the civil society to identify different forms of labor and make sure that it is going to help them really come out of the struggle. So why, what is being done in the state? So this is part of many states which are suffering from bonded labor. This case study is from Karnataka, where Zilla Parishad leaders teamed with other government departments. They are working on sensitization of public to the idea of bonded labor. So because many of time public also doesn't know that this is a story of bonded labor. At the same time, those who have left or those who have been rehabilitated, there needs to be a union, or there is already a union which is strong, and this union is of the survivors of bonded labor. They need to be formed in different districts. They need to be collaborated to make sure the idea of bonded labor is eradicated completely out of the state. So this topic is not only relevant for us in GS paper 4, it's also relevant in the idea of human rights, where bonded labor is considered to be a inhuman practice. So try to relate it to both 4 and GS paper 2. The next topic is a topic from Hindu itself called How Corruption Spurred Growth in China. So this is a very interesting and a paradoxical topic, where we are talking about corruption and economic growth going high. So this was a very interesting small article present in the Hindu, which talked about corruption here. So corruption's relevance we already know. It is relevant in paper 2. It's important in paper 4 as well. So, corruption is, according to the normal perception, a major reason why many countries remain poor. But this article, a small write up, was telling that corruption is not bad all the times. So, it is based on a Singapore political economist called UN Yuan Ang. Okay, remember the names. You can quote her and the book that she has written for the exam purpose. So Yuan Ang has told that in her book called China's Gilded Age. Okay, then I'll write the name of the book, China's Gilded Age. In this book, she has tried to distinguish between two types of corruption. So, one type of corruption she tells is good, other type of corruption she tells is bad. So, the first type of corruption she tells is theft corruption. Try to remember the name along with the book here and the author so that your answers will have authenticity. So, theft corruption are those practices of extortion where a person is paying bribe but gains nothing in return for the bribe that he or she is paying. Let's say small amount of corruption or money that we get pay to get small issues done in the government offices or even in the private areas. So this small amount of corruption or this is called theft extraction because it is acting as a drag on economic growth. So, if this corruption didn't exist, people would have used the money in better opportunities. So, here also the author classifies it into two types, calling it either petty or grand based on the amount that is used here. At the same time, how is this categorized? Based on the scale at which it happens. So, this is the idea of theft corruption. Now we'll go to another idea called speed money or access money. That is, if bribes are paid to gain access to rights that a person is having or resources, especially the ones under the control of elite members of the society, this can lead to faster economic growth, at least in the short run. So if you recall, this is about, let's say when let's say it is a person is trying to implement land reforms and they are entitled to good amount of land, but the officer demands, or let's say there is bribe at the ground administration, but once this bribe is paid, the end result is that the land held by elite is coming to the local population. So bureaucratic rules and other barriers that restrict free access to resources can be curtailed by paying bribes in this case. So corruption can help ease access to resources and economic growth. So the author tells that greasing the wheels of the economy would be the outcome of speed money or access money. So if we try to see this, there was a recent case where an Indian group of thinkers, they have applied this Yuan Ang's theory in the case of West Bengal government's economic growth. They tell that in the case of West Bengal, from the past 10 to 15 years, the economy has been slowing down. So, what could be the reason? They tell that why the economic slow is average growth is less than the national growth in case of West Bengal, because most of the large non farm sector, that is we talk about manufacturing and construction industry in West Bengal, they are not performing properly. They are plagued by petty theft is the allegation here. So this is a kind of corruption that doesn't help in deepening democracy. At the same time, farm sector, which is also a major contributor, they have corruption here as well, but it is the form of access money. That is the second idea where economic growth has been achieved in the long run. So remember this case study of corruption being black, corruption is white, that is good, or corruption is somewhere in between, that is grey. So here there is a question that we can practice called, do situational ethics compromise moral integrity, or do they reflect the true complexity of ethical decision making? Substantiate with your argument with example. So if you have revised your ethics, there are two types of ethics that we usually come across. One is situational ethics, the other one is universal ethics. So situational ethics is about it is supported by Aristotle. We can say it is telling that what is right or what is wrong depends on the situation and the circumstances. You cannot tell that if telling truth is correct, it is an ethics, and it should always be a fact that a person should tell truth. This is what universal ethics tells. But situational ethics tells that depending on the situation, we have to decide whether we have to tell truth or we have to tell a lie. So universal ethics, on the other hand, tells that uh, whatever is the idea of uh, ethics, it applies to every part of the world in every single time. So, irrespective of the barrier of time, world, and the situation, universal ethics are very rightly applied. So, this argument is supported by Immanuel Kant, Albert Einstein. So, situational ethics tells that if your end is good, whatever means you utilize is fine. That is, if your end goal is genuine, deciding right or wrong is the means can always be justified. So, what Aristotle tells in this case is what is just and unjust, it is not defined by a law, but it is arising naturally out of the circumstances. At the same time, related to universal ethics, Albert Einstein has made a very popular statement called relativity applies to physics, not to ethics. So, based on this argument of situational and universal ethics and the example we just discussed, try to answer this question for 10 marks. As we have already discussed, you just have to give a good introduction, structure it, and end with a good conclusion. Okay, the next topic is quite lengthy one, but very apt for our discussion because this topic is going to be relevant even throughout 2025. So you would have guessed it by now. It is about climate crisis and the money. So it is about climate finance. So there are some statistics which can be remembered, but before that, COP29 that recently concluded in Azerbaijan, it had a concluding note in the document which was quite bone chilling, we must say. Climate change isn't waiting for international pledges, and neither can the world's most vulnerable nations, because every delayed dollar costs lives, livelihoods, and chances at survival. So, this throws light on how dangerous the idea of climate change has become and how our persisting delays has led to is or would result in greater tolls in the public. So we'll do some maths here, and these numbers should be registered for you because any question on climate finance, this data would be very relevant for you. Okay, so the author tells that there is a yawning gap, that is huge amount of gap between climate finance needs and actual disbursements. So how this is different or how this is working, we'll just check. That is, the estimate is that we would need, for mitigating the problems of climate change, we would be needing minimum of 1.3 trillion dollars annually, that is per year. By which year? By 2035. Okay, 2035. So developed nations, what they have told, developed nations have almost come to an agreement that by the same year they will be ready to give 300 billion dollars. So let's say we are finding source from other sources like multilateral agencies, or let's say private players. We can somehow bring $200 billion, let's say by 2035 or 2030. In addition, let's say some emerging economies like China and India also will contribute. We can bring somewhere around $60 billion. So at the end of the day, this is still not going to what is 1.3 trillion dollar the need, and these two are yet to happen. The only hope is that this 300 billion dollar would function. So the problem that comes with this is, the main reason, as you economists would have thought, is inflation. That is, the real value of this fund would be eroded, and at an annual inflation rate of 5%, the project, whatever we have now telling $300 billion, it would be only worth $175 billion, which is still a very small amount of money. The second one is about, we still have no clarity on, or we can tell there is an absence of new and additional sources of funding. The third issue is about emerging economies, that is India and the others. Emerging economies are already constrained by limited resources, and they really can't rely on international pledges for fulfilling the climate commitments they have to perform. So there is something that we are calling, the author is calling, is that paradox of climate finance. So many realities will be facing here. That is, in this, in with respect to financing climate, there are mainly two ideas. One is mitigation, the other one is adaptation. So this article, for your information, is from Down to Earth magazine. So what is the meaning of mitigation? It is reducing or preventing the causes of climate change. We can give an example for this as renewable energy. Adaptation, on the other hand, is about adjusting systems and practices to cope with the changes of climate change. So it is often, let's say, it is about making a city flood proof or creating agricultural products which is resilient to drought. These examples. So as a result, what happens, this part or mitigation part is something that comes with a huge generation of revenue. At the same time, if you talk about adaptation needs, adaptation is having less direct revenue streams. Okay, less direct revenue. Hence, for emerging economies where public budgets are stretched thin, financing this is very challenging. So, lack of income, let's say, there is a concept called green bond, which are good for raising funds. But what happens is, in many of these countries, disposable income is very less. So, this financing option also has not worked out well. As a result, we need to reimagine climate finance by blending financial innovation with incentives and other reforms that the government can take. So what are the innovative solution that we can plan on? So the first one, you can note it down. They are quite lengthy. We must say there are some 8 solutions here. So the first one is about linking returns to local economic multipliers. So, for example, let's say there is a government entity that has planned for flood protection infrastructure. So, jobs in construction of this infrastructure will be created. Opportunities will be given for suppliers, giving, let's say, some entities that provide raw materials for the business. All of this will stimulate local economy. So investments generate tangible community benefits here while offering return to investors. So I hope you got the point here. Investing in local economic multipliers, that is, give the example of flood proofing of a village or a city and the employment opportunities created through that. This would come under the means of adaptation, if you recall. The second one, it is impact linked bonds. Impact linked bonds is finance projects with social or environmental objectives, such as, let's say, health and boosting agricultural productivity can be an idea. When this kind of projects are told, there are many investors who come and invest in this. So let's say, for example, government departments would be interested if a project comes out with respect to improving the health or agriculture in the society. Private banks and private investors also would come off. So if we link this to, let's say, success of the project, so it is like, if the scheme becomes successful, those who have invested will get better returns. If we make this bond in a impact linked manner, it will draw more and more investment. So let's say we have made a project to achieve, let's say, CO2 emission limit. So if the project is achieving a CO2 reduction, the bonds will be offering higher returns. So in this format, if we plan any bond market in the country, that would be helpful. But we just saw that there is no disposable income. There is a solution for it. There are many investors, that is, who are situated in other parts of the world. They can be investing in this. And as it is a government, or as it is a scheme, or let's say as it is an idea like health, CO2 emissions, they are quite close to the government targets as well. So government also would be a major investor in this. So there is another section of people who can be brought to invest here. We'll look about it in the coming topics. Okay, so the third idea is about this can also boost carbon credit. So in the above point that we saw, India can also boost its carbon market. So especially local communities can take up projects such as afforestation, reforestation, urban greening. So the credit can be traded internationally, providing revenue for reinvestment again, so that again and again we can invest in the similar program. So the fourth one would be monetizing climate resilience through public infrastructure. So what we saw before was the private investment. Here, green infra projects would be funded by the government itself, especially in a public private partnership manner. So this, for example, let's say a project being made, user fee, tolls and PPP agreements, this would not only generate income for the government, but it would also help in boosting the revenue of the local people. So the fifth idea is shared energy models. Shared energy saving models. So let's say a particular entity has been given a cap of maximum energy utilization. If they are saving or reducing or used a very little part of it, it can be shared with other stakeholders. So savings generated from one entity is focused from reduced energy consumption. They can be shared between multiple stakeholders here, so that what we save, that much energy we can generate or reuse. So this model can be popularized by the people. And the sixth idea is about restructuring climate debt. So climate debt, like any other debt, needs to be repaid along with interest and principal. But this idea is about debt for climate swaps. Okay, that is, many international creditors can forgive portions of debt for climate related commitments. This would go a long way in encouraging countries to take debt, but part of it can be waived off, the remaining part can be repaid by the entity. So this restructuring would go a long way in preventing instead of waiting for external grants, this model can be adopted. The seventh idea is about Diaspora Connect. So this is the team or group of people I was planning, or I was telling you to extract here. If you see in the impact linked bonds, we can encourage the diaspora to invest, especially green bonds and such kind of concepts, to attract people with high net worth staying outside India, and they have vested interest in home market. So such diaspora can be attracted to raise environment or climate funds. So the eighth point here is technology driven solutions. Right? So here, let's say there is a model called climate risk insurance. So whenever there is a risk of a person facing any mitigation or any impact because of climate, they can insure their property or assets or anything. So if the risk happens, or if the situation of badness arises, the money can be diverted for mitigation, or let's say solving the problem. If it doesn't arise, the money can be used for adaptation purpose. So this model of using technology driven solution would be helpful. Or let's say we are integrating blockchain for climate financing, so that transparency exists in the whole process. Right? So these solutions are quite useful because in the Baku summit, we have not finalized a major deal with respect to what could be the climate finance in the future. So in the year 2025 as well, the discussions would continue, and the mains we can expect a question running around the concept of climate finance. So these solutions, out of the 8, you can at least remember 3 or 4 of them and effectively practice them in your answer writing, so that it stands unique in your papers. So the last topic for today is what's in a name. So what do our viewers think? Are names so important for us? That is, a person's identity is more about the character rather than the name they usually tell about. So, this is about a small story that had come up in the Brat news channel where there was a small homeless a girl from an unprivileged or underprivileged society. Her father has named her Nirasha. You can see the name here. Nirasha means disappointment. So the parents were expecting for a male child, and as it was a female child, the parents have named her Nirasha, that is sadness. So there was an entity which was started by CD Ciesley, this person's YouTube channel, Instagram channel. Their entity tried to go to the place where this girl lives and have changed her name to Asha. So their friends celebrated her birthday by cutting a cake with the name Asha on it and trying to sing songs for her and hold placards telling that her name is now Asha, it is not Nirasha. So, what we can observe here is the genuine gesture of some right minded people who want to eradicate the idea that a girl is not a burden and she can really be a ray of hope in the lives of many. At the same time, at a time when we see that places, names of the places are being changed, names of the roads and the airports and other areas are being changed. So, is name such important an identity? When we take this as a perspective, what's in a name is an idea that is can be borrowed or inspired by William Shakespeare. In one of his novels, he has written that what's in a name, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. That is, you give any other name to the flower rose, does it start smelling bad or does it smell in a different way? The answer is no. So we should identify a person based on their identity or based on their characters rather than a mere name that humans have given. So what are the identities or what are the plans or where we can use this? It's mainly relevant for our rather than GS, it would be mainly applicable in our essays if you get any philosophical connotation related to identity of a person. So the first idea related to name is identity versus essence, which one should be given more importance. So identity is about intrinsic quality of a thing and it is going to remain unchanged regardless of the essence is about the quality that doesn't change and identity might change. Correct, it is a label, it is something that we stick from the above. Essence is something that is inherent. So it is up to a person to decide which one is more important. The second dimension we can talk about is power of names in changing or in shaping the reality. That is, names influence perception and identity, because even in our historic times we have seen that there have been many great leaders who have created great joys for the public and we remember them with their name and the work they have done. And yes, the truth is also that the work they have done is so important that we remember the person because of what they have done. So again, the conflict, identity or essence, right? So this is another version of looking towards the point. The third one, beginning or the third one is about names and cultural identity. Many a times a person's name or a name of a place or a location has a lot to do with the local culture. So if we try to replace the name, it hampers the cultural identity of a place. So if you want to retain the culture, retain the name is a argument that we can put here, but definitely would not apply to the case of Asha in this way. And we can tell, yes, it also implies the culture or a practice in the country that a girl child is unwelcome. So we can rightly tell cultural identity goes through with the name. So the idea is also about name and power dynamics. What is the meaning of power dynamics here? Many of the time people use the name as a tool of power to control others, to dominate others. So for sure, this idea of name is about power and dynamics. So if the name doesn't exist, probably this couldn't be used as a tool. So the fifth idea is bringing it from Buddhism, where the author Buddha tells that names are mere constructs. They create attachment and illusion. So over obsession of oneself with their own identity is something that Buddhism negates and has been negating from quite some time. So We have a counter to this, or we have an opposite idea to this coming from Confucianism. So Confucius tells that beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. So both these ideas are relevant, that name is not so important but what one person does is important. On the other hand, name plays an equally important role because it gives the identity to the good work or the bad work that a person is doing, and has a lot to mold the attitude of the public towards an individual. So try to analyze this, especially for philosophical essays, right? So that's all for today's episode. We'll keep meeting with such insightful ideas. Thank you.